Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in once again. It's your host, Bryce Rankowitz, and Mr. none other than AJ, the Cat and Zero.
Yes, sir. We are here. Episode, I lose track. We got to get better at keeping
6.
tracks. 6. Man, we're taking
plugging
off.
away. Yeah, man. Building that momentum, getting into a groove, and overcoming these technical obstacles. We'll get it. We'll nail it. So thanks everybody for tuning in.
If only our listeners could know the nightmare of a process this has been to try to get this whole thing to work.
We'll get it.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
Eventually.
It's getting easier. So thank you for everybody for tuning in. Hopefully you are in a comfortable chair on your way to work. You're
at the gym.
Really giving in to yourself to let this experience of our podcast fill your soul and body and mind.
This is yoga class.
No idea what I'm talking about. No, but thanks again for listening. In this episode, we're getting personal with AJ. And we wanted to focus this episode. Look, we understand that this is a big AJ audience. I mean, I'm a nobody. Who am I? I'm just a loser. So a lot of people are curious and have a lot of questions about AJ, whether it's kind of industry insights or personal insights or recommendations, riding advice, et cetera, et cetera. And so we sent out a query on social media for you guys to ask some questions that we were going to address, and we got an overwhelming response. So we appreciate everybody for responding, for getting those questions in. And we have a cool little giveaway that we have a great sponsor, FXR Moto. And they were gracious enough to let us do this giveaway for them. So thank you for the participation. We got a lot of responses. And we want to acknowledge that while we had a bunch of great questions, there's just no way that we could possibly get to them all. I think we were both a little overwhelmed with the quantity of responses, wouldn't you say?
Right, which is a good problem to have. But yeah, like you said, there's going to be a lot of questions that kind of not replicate themselves, but there was a lot of very similar questions. So if we do read off somebody's email and it's not your name, don't just tune out, because it could be very likely that it's answering one of the questions that you might have asked. There were some really good questions, and there was a good response, which is cool to see on these 6 podcasts in.
For sure. And like I just said, there was a lot of questions that were very, very similar. So we're going to do a better job. I think we'd both admit that we're going to do a better job responding to the emails. I didn't think that it was going to take off like it has. So we're going to do a better job of responding to the emails and just acknowledging to everybody that we did receive them. And trust us, we're both monitoring that email. We are seeing them. So while we might not have gotten to everybody's question, I hope that our answers and AJ's answers specifically kind of touch a lot of the bases that might have been covered in the questions. So just stick around, listen, and if your name wasn't read off as a questioner, chances are there's going to be something in that answer that touches your question also. So thanks again. And before we get started, just want to acknowledge that the sponsor for this podcast is FXR Moto. They have recently got into the motocross side of things. I believe they're coming from the snowmobile realm and the snow sport realm, right, AJ?
Right. So FXR is a company that, don't quote me on this, but they've been in the moto game for a few years now, and I started riding for them last year, the year before. And their privateer support is like nothing else I've seen from any other company, which is amazing. So that was kind of how I became familiar with them. And then when I was contracted to ride for them, I want to say maybe last year was the first year. Time just flies.
Yes, it was.
I was just blown away with the quality. And I've worn a lot of different companies' gear, and when I put this stuff on, it was top notch. And not to mention being in Virginia, riding in the cold, them coming from a snowmobile background, their cold weather stuff was next level too. So they're a great company with some really cool people, and the product, which is one of the more important things, the product is pretty darn awesome.
And they have a bunch of cool like hybrid gear sets. I would call it like that vest that you have that like zip up. It matches the traditional kit, but
Yeah,
it's
which is
almost
awesome.
like a thermal type thing. Which yeah, that's cool. I haven't seen that
Right.
before.
So at that, like
Um,
for me being at an Anaheim or any of the rounds that have an open stadium where you're dealing with the elements in Supercross, and for any amateur that's racing outdoor, it's a factor as well. Where you don't want to have this big bulky sweatshirt on, but you want something to keep your core warm. Even if you're just wearing it before the gate or before you're lining up, and then when you get on the line, you take it off. That vest is something that's super super cool, and it looks cool. I mean, I raced with it. I think at Gillette Stadium last year. I actually wore it during the race at multiple rounds, which was pretty funny.
and let me just say, from an outsider standpoint, I haven't never been the one who is like a fanboy of any particular gear company. You know, I've worn Fox, I've worn Thor, I've worn O'Neill, I've worn Answer. I've kind of just always gravitated to the stuff that it looks cool. Um, I think FXR's kits are some of the best looking gear out there right now. I really do. I think their combination of colors, everything they have in the design, it just pops on the track. I mean, your high vis stuff, that yellow, that orange,
Yeah,
I
that's
think
right
it's
up your
some of the
alley.
best looking gear out there. Oh yeah, definitely. So everybody, go check them out. And um, like we mentioned, there is a winner of a gear set. So stick around. At some point in the podcast, we will announce that. We're not going to tell you where, because then everyone would just fast forward that section and wouldn't listen to it. So um, we do announce the winner, and I hope that we have an opportunity to do this down the line a couple more times. Keep you guys engaged and give you some cool opportunities to get some good stuff. So without further ado, I think we should get right into it. What do you think?
Yeah, let's hop right in.
Check out FXR gear, everybody. FXRracing.com and follow them on social media and go check them out. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy this one.
Yes, sir. All right, we'll just hop right into it here. So we got an email from Austin Jesmain, and I apologize ahead of time if I'm just butchering names this whole podcast.
There are some interesting names here, so we'll do
They're
our
all
best. But
difficult. There's not an
yep,
easy one in the bunch. Oh, wait, we just have a John.
yep, JON. That's simple enough. Thank you,
um,
John.
so we got from Austin, hey AJ. Um, by the way, guys, make sure we're saying hi to Bryce too on these. A lot of people just saying hey AJ. Here's a question for you.
Yeah, but nobody. I don't. I mean, I'm not a famous Supercross star.
Yeah, but you
I'm
have
a
lots
nobody.
of you have a. What, did I just hear a phone ringing?
You did.
Oh man,
Carry on.
you're fired. All right, we got hey AJ. Here's a question for you. Do you believe pros get paid enough? And what are your thoughts on the pay gap between first and 10th? Um, really
That's a great
interesting.
question.
It is an interesting question.
You
Uh,
and I have talked about this several times. Uh,
yeah, and I want to talk about it in the most objective way I possibly can. Because obviously I'm going to say no, we don't. But I want to give support to that answer. Um, and so my answer would be no. I would assume most people's answers would be no. And to give you guys some insight on how much we get paid from the AMA alone, I think Bryce, you have
well,
kind of a breakdown.
yeah, no, and I think that's an important thing that we should distinguish is that we are when we're talking about this, we're going to take everything as a whole, right? Or are we talking just about AMA payouts?
Well, let's start with just with the AMA, and then let's talk to them about um, bonus structures and how that's going to vary from person to person.
Right. I think I mean the AMA payouts, if the average person were to just go look at this, which I mean it's publicly available knowledge, you can go Google it and find it. And um, I think when I first started getting keen to this, I was like blown away. I mean,
Right.
it does nobody would think that it's this low. So for example, first place main for a 450 win is $12,000, which I think is just crazy. Um, and
It's
it goes down.
bizarre.
I mean, 22nd, 1614, $1,600. So not only is a huge discrepancy, but it's super low.
Right, and you're basing that number theoretically, I would assume, on that's the payout. That's your purse payout from the AMA. So really, that's kind of your payout from Feld, if you want to look at it that way. How many? I mean, that's the crazy part is how many tickets we're selling to these stadiums, some of which are actually being sold out. You know, anywhere between 30, 40, 50,000 people are showing up, and the purse breakdown is that little. Just doesn't really seem to add up. And then if you went and looked at the 250 class, I forget what it is. I want to say it's maybe 7,500 for a win, maybe even less. Um, it's crazy. If riders were relying just on the AMA payout alone, which some privateers are, none of the top guys are, obviously, you wouldn't be able to survive. I mean, to make a 450 main event and to be a top 22 450 rider, supercross rider in the world, you're making $1,640.
Right. And I think that's an important distinguishing factor here is that when you're looking at the specifically with this question, you're looking at how much pros get paid. This is just a very small factor. So I think we should start to address what you and I have talked about previously was the bonuses and how those kicked in. Because bringing it back to the AMA purses, you look at the 450 LCQ payout. The LCQ payout is $1,300. So if you if you win an LCQ, you're looking at 1350, I think it is. Relative to a 22nd finish in a main event is 1614. So it's not a big difference, but you're not capturing any of those bonuses in the LCQ. So why don't you talk about some of the bonuses, how it works, maybe how it works for you in particular, and how that could really add up.
Right. And I think before I dive even into that, I think part of the problem here is the top guys like Muskin, Tomac, Roxon, they're making a justifiable amount of money. They're making millions and millions of dollars, which they deserve to be making millions and millions of dollars. And I think maybe that's where the AMA and Feld feel like they can get away with kind of screwing everyone over on just their purse payouts, because a guy like Roxon and Tomac, they're not going to complain. Who knows if they even see that $12,000? You know what I mean? They're using that as just like grocery money. Like I don't know what they're even using that for, to be honest with you. Like, what do they care?
Right.
Because a guy like Eli Tomac, and don't quote me on this exactly, but I know guys like Villapoto, most of them are paid bonuses for top three only. A guy like Villapoto, I heard from somebody that he was only top two, because he was so confident that he would win that he didn't want it. He would just want to put as much money as he could in the top two. So a guy like that is making anywhere between 150 to 200,000 from Kawasaki or whoever the brand is, for a weekend alone. That's not including, Tomac, if he's getting paid, or he is getting paid by Alpine Star and by, what does he wear for helmets? Like Bell helmets, Oakley goggles, whatever the case may be. He's getting paid from all of those companies separately. So these guys are raking in ungodly amounts of money every weekend, which they should be. They're the best in the world at what they do. The problem is when you start dipping down to, actually, even to the guys that are outside of that top three, there might be some teams that focus their bonus structure on a top five basis for guys like, and I may not be right about this, guys like Blake Baggett, Brock Tickle is one that would come to mind, a guy that maybe had a bonus structure set up that was more evenly spread out. So if he got a top five, he'd make it a little bit of extra cash. But if you think about a guy like Weston Pike, for example, that's going out there and getting 7th to 10th place every weekend, he's not getting any of those bonuses. So a guy like Weston is relying completely on his salary from JGR his salary from, whatever, actually JGR, it's all inclusive to my knowledge. So he's relying on his salary from JGR, and he's relying on his check from the AMA. And then if you go even further down to, let's say, myself, um, I'm not getting a salary from any companies. What I get is my AMA money, which I rely pretty heavily on. And then when I start making main events, I have bonus structures set up for me to just make the main events. So my bonus structure is set up. It doesn't matter if I get 8th place in a main event or 22nd place in a main event. As long as I get in there, I get my bonus structure. So I get my bonuses from FXR gear, from Arai helmets, from all of these different companies. It's not a lot, 500 here, 1,000 here, 500 there, but it adds up. So that's where the difference, where you said there's not that big of a discrepancy between that 22nd place and getting 2nd, 3rd, 4th place in an LCQ, 5th place. Well, how many make it through an LCQ? 4. So if you miss
Or
if you miss the main event by 1, you're making, if on paper looking at the AMA, $300 less, $400 less. But to me, I'm that's the jump from $1,400, give or take, to if I get 22nd in a main event, I'm not making any less than $3,500. So
right.
it's huge for me to make that main event, obviously. But that also, I'm in a good situation and a good spot for compared to most privateers, because I kind of put in that legwork and I have a good program. I've been with a lot of these sponsors for a long time, so I'm able to work out certain deals. I have bonus structures set up to where if I win an LCQ, I get bonus just for that win. Um, so I'm kind of one of the lucky ones.
Well, we'll come back to that because that's going to be another question we're going to address. But there is a payout for just an LCQ appearance, so that's another important factor. So you can, if you make an LCQ, you get paid. I think
So
that's
so right, by theoretically, by making the night show. So by making the top 40, let's say if 80 guys sign up for A1 in a couple weeks. What you see on TV is the top 40 that they've pulled from time qualifying. They've narrowed those 80 guys down to 40. So 41st through 80th don't get a dime. If you make the night show, so you make the LCQ and you just go out and ride the LCQ and roll around, I think you're guaranteed from the AMA, what is it? Is it 960,
1,000.
like $1,000, 965,
Yeah.
something like that. Or they actually might have upped it to 1,000. But if you're looking at that, even it's that's still not even right. You're talking about the
Well,
top 40 450 rider in the world, and it's $1,000. The anyone from 20th to 40th place is paying for all this out of their own pocket.
well, like let's look at it like this. So Feld is making, the AMA is making that payout. Total for 250, 450, it's under $200,000 total for everybody who's there, which, and you
Per
put it
event.
that way, that's per event, under
That's
200 grand.
that's nothing.
You'd think so. I mean, think about the ticket sales and everybody who's there and all the, I mean, what do you think?
Merchandise,
It's not free.
everything.
Oh yeah, everything. I mean, Monster pays, I can't even imagine what they pay to have the Supercross series be the Monster Energy Supercross series. Like, there's so much revenue there. So with regard to this question, I think that there's probably some room to up these payouts, and I think it's unique. Supercross, why it's so cool in motocross, is that it gives people the opportunity who aren't huge household names to go out and race a pro event, be on TV, get some notoriety, get some experience, and be a contender for a professional sport where there's not another sport out there that you can really say that. Maybe golf, you would argue, but um, I think there should be more incentive financially to. These guys are putting their bodies on the line. A lot of them are traveling across the country week to week in vans, some living in their vans. There's a huge
Right.
sacrifice at the lower level to be here, and some more financial compensation probably wouldn't hurt anybody. I think the other important thing to note is that, and you mentioned it, is that a lot of the payout is really based on, or when I say payout, what a pro is earning, the majority of it's coming from endorsements, whether it's the
Right.
team, their gear sponsors. Clinique in Ken Roxon's case, I love that. That's hilarious. I love all the hate.
Good.
Right? I don't know
That's
if I love
smart
all
of
the
him.
hate or hate all the hate, but I got a kick out of it. Uh, so a lot of most of it is endorsements.
Yeah, 95% of it, which if I'm not super knowledgeable on other sports, but I don't think that's how it works necessarily in, let's say, golf. I think if you go online
Oh
and
no,
look at
no,
how
it
much
it
money,
is. There's huge purses for golf. Golf might not be the best one. I mean, but a lot of these guys make a ton of money on
oh
endorsements.
yeah,
You look at,
but also
you know,
their
and
purses are huge too. Like I'm pretty sure if you win a golf tournament, it's probably upwards
oh
of
yeah,
a
millions,
million,
millions. Yeah. Hmm.
not $12,000.
No, no.
So that's a good question. We could rant all day long on that. Um,
Well, let's roll that into the next question about finances, and that was how. You want to read it?
see if I could find it here. So from Justin, holy moly, Branja Fort. Let's hope that's close.
Sorry, Justin.
How hard is it as a privateer to fund your racing program? Also, congrats on the proposal. So thanks, Justin. Um, it's it's very difficult, and again, I don't want to say I'm lucky because at the same time, and we'll talk more about this later because another question will bring this topic up. I like to think I've done a really good job of branding myself and making myself marketable, especially for a guy that's, you know, back of the pack main event rider in a 450 class. Not to say that's bad, but a lot of guys that are finishing a couple positions in front or a couple positions behind where I am aren't able to get the support that I do. So I've kind of had to look
I,
at
I
it
would
in
say, and
creative ways.
I'm not just saying this because you're my friend, but I think that you've done an exceptional job with that. In the way that you're creative in funding your program, and maybe you could give everybody a little more sense of what you do on a season basis to get that funding. But as people listen and they're hearing how relatively little that a privateer is going to earn or has the potential to not earn if they don't show up the night show. There's 40 guys that show up that'll do time qualifying and they don't get a dime. So that's
Right.
all out of pocket expense, and that's a big burden to overcome week after week
It's hard to
without the
get out
proper
of that
support.
hole. You see
Right.
guys like I don't know if you're familiar with the name, like a Josh Greco, who
Hmm.
shows up every weekend. He lives in his van. He shows up every weekend in his van with his dog, and he relies on making that top 40 so he could get that $1,000 so he can afford to get to the next round. That's that's tough, and that's a lot of pressure. Um, and there's a lot of guys that are, of course, there's privateers that are showing up that have the beautiful rigs and their families have money, and yeah, there's going to be that, but it's not a cheap sport, you know. It's hard, and they're making it. The thing is, too, they're making it harder and harder to get your pro license, which I think is fair. You don't want guys out there that don't belong, but it just costs a lot of money to even get your pro license, especially with the whole
Well,
Supercross futures and the way the schedule
describe that for
is
people.
not, so.
Describe that for people who might not know.
So they had the Arena Cross series, which was sort of, the double A of Supercross. In a way. I mean, there was also some guys that retired from Supercross went on to be successful Arena Cross guys. But that was the way that you would earn your points to get your pro license so you could race professional Supercross. They got rid of that for this year, and now they're doing something called Supercross Futures, which will be held in the same venue the day after the Supercross race. I believe they have 8, maybe 9 of them this year. The problem with that is you have to score X amount of points you can't just go and win one of the Supercross Futures races. They kind of design it so that you have to attend 3 of them no matter what. And again, I could be a little off on some of these facts. You might only have to attend 2. Um, None of them are really close to each other unless you live in Southern California and you can kind of hit Anaheim a couple times and, you know, Oakland and call it a day. But being a guy in the East Coast, there's nothing that's close. You got like Nashville,
Several hours.
Denver,
Atlanta, and New Jersey.
Yeah, Jersey isn't even having
Or
one. Atlanta might be.
Atlanta, Daytona.
Daytona, I think they're doing it. Yeah, it's tough. It's a lot of money. Yeah, I was very lucky. Basically, when I was 15 years old, my dad supported me throughout my whole career, paid for everything, didn't make much money, but every dime he made, he spent on me. I grew up in a time where Kawasaki contingency was really good, so we could go to an amateur race and I could make $1,000 a day. If we race Saturday and Sunday, I could make $2,000 for the weekend, which would be loaded onto a Kawasaki card. My dad could go and put that right back into it, which thank God we had that, because if we didn't, I wouldn't have been able to keep racing. But when I turned 15, we kind of got to the point where I was presented with an opportunity to go and stay down at MTF and GPF, which are neighboring training facilities, for I think a month. I went down with a buddy and I was just going to stay for a little bit, see how it went. We were out of money, but it was sort of that last ditch effort. Like, all right, give this a shot. See if, long shot, but let's see if you could get noticed by somebody. Sure enough, I was riding the Supercross track at GPF with Justin Barsha. I was riding the Supercross track at MTF with Barsha as well, because I think Barsha was bouncing back and forth at that point between the two. I was riding with Davalos, a bunch of those guys. And honestly, I was just about the same speed as them every single day we went out. And I was on a 2009 Cowie 450 with like 220 hours. This bike was hammered. I don't even know if I had Supercross suspension. So long story short, I ended up getting noticed by Josh Woods at GPF, who runs the Babbitt's Kawasaki Arena Cross team. So they signed me to a contract for Arena Cross, and that was kind of my savior right there. So I went out in Arena Cross. I had a paid way to go race, which was that was kind of my in to get my points. So I ended up winning the Arena Cross championship, scored all the points I needed, didn't have to pay anything out of my own pocket. And then from there, that snowballed into my first Supercross deal, which again, I've never had a big ride or anything, but it was enough for me to get by and not be spending tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars out of my own pocket. Or without that first opportunity, I don't know how I would have got my foot in the door.
So, as a former Arena Cross champion, and you did it the hard way, what do you think about the Supercross futures? And what do you think about like these guys having to ride a Supercross track versus an Arena Cross track to do the same thing?
I think it's good as long as they make the track difficult enough. I think in the past years, last year they did a couple of the amateur Supercross races. They always do Daytona, but they threw a couple other ones in the mix. They did one out of Anaheim. I think they did one at Atlanta. The problem was they dumbed down the track so much, it didn't resemble a Supercross track at all at that point. So if anything, to me, it gets more dangerous because it's more high speed. There's nothing separating anyone, so everyone's on top of each other. I think if they're going to turn it into the true Supercross futures, they should just not leave the track because people would get killed, but they need to make it technical and tight and Supercross style, just like Arena Cross was.
Right.
So I'm interested to see what they do with that. I really hope they don't dumb it down to the point that they did last year. But this kind of, I want to almost segue this into another question by Josh. God, another crazy last name.
Well,
Josh
hold on
Degendorf.
there, Sonny. Hold on there, Sonny. We'll get there. We'll get there. I know where you're going with this, but I don't know if I got a satisfactory answer
Okay.
from this last question. So explain. So we're talking about funding your Supercross program, and you have at least a very unique setup where you've gone and asked for a title sponsor for each individual round, which I think is super creative. I think some people give you a little bit of hate for that, which whatever. But hey, look, as a privateer, you got to do what you got to do. So going back to this question about funding, let everybody know what you do to actually fund your season. Where does your revenue come from to fund the races for, let's say, 2019?
Okay, good question. So for this season, I'm relying completely on my 17 title sponsors for the 17 different rounds. So I I sort of got this inspiration from I saw JGR was doing it not with title sponsors, but they kind of had at a couple races they would have a little sponsor come on, um, and they would do something special for that sponsor, have a setup in the pits, whatever the case may be, something that was local. And I thought to myself, well, my demographic as what I'm pulling in as far as sponsorship goes would really be that small local business, right? That doesn't necessarily have a ton of money. Not there's maybe could be even scraping to get by in a sense that they're kind of in the same boat that I am. These companies aren't going to pull they're not going to get much if they're paying me $10,000 for the whole season. If they're a small company that's in Nashville and don't really care about anything that's outside of their county or their state. You know what I mean? So this is a perfect opportunity for these sponsors to pay $1,500, $2,000 for the weekend. They get, a very like specialized sponsorship that tailors to their needs for that specific weekend. They can hit their target market, and it's kind of a win-win for all of us. So I don't have a big budget this year, but I have enough to where I can fly to the races. I can get my bike transported to all the rounds. I can stay in hotels. I don't have to do anything crazy winging it. Um, I definitely cut corners in a lot of places. I can't do much to the bike. Not that I really want to. I like my bike stock anyhow. Um, but my budget for the whole season would probably be in the $30,000 to $40,000 range, where there's a privateer like Dakota Tedder would probably be in the $200,000 to $300,000 range. Then you have other privateers like Josh Greco that would probably be in the $5,000 to $7,000 range. So you kind of have everyone on all different platforms. But
Right. And don't sell yourself short, man. I mean, I think that there's a ton of work that goes into that, and I think that gets lost on some people. You don't have a fancy agent like the Roxons of the world to do this stuff on your behalf. I mean, this is all your legwork,
yeah, I've
and I think
quickly
it's a
realized how hard it is having 17 sponsors to juggle. Like just keeping track of who's who and having these numbers and emails and Instagram tags and all of that sorted. It's super
well, I think
confusing.
yeah, and I think people would be surprised to know like those graphics you run on your bike, you're scrambling the night before the race to adhere those to your plastics yourself after peeling the old ones off. I mean, this isn't something that you get a nice fancy package of your bike shows up with graphics on it for the title sponsor. This is all legwork that you do behind the scenes, which I mean,
Yeah.
people don't realize that you're peeling the graphics off. You're taking the night before, you're sticking the new graphics on. I mean, it's another thing to be worried about. It's another distraction, but it's something that you've committed to, and I think it's pretty commendable. And I think it's that creativity that does set you apart from a lot of the other privateers and has helped you build your brand to really what it is. So with that, I think you should get into that next question from Josh that you were alluding to before.
Okay, so you did know where I was going with that. Yep. So we got Josh Degendorf. Man, I feel like they're typing fake last names just to mess us up here. Uh,
Josh, that's clearly like a Lord of the Rings character, if I remember correctly.
yeah.
Sorry, Josh.
He goes, Hey AJ, how are you coming up with new ideas to build your brand that nobody has done before? In parentheses, you put amateur support on Supercross Futures events and internships at each race for mechanics and media. And what are your top goals that you hope to see with both of those programs? So, what he's referring to is the collective experience is doing an internship program under myself. We also have an amateur support program. So on Sundays, riders can sign up. Um, sorry, to basically have me as their coach for the day, kind of their mentor for the day. They can pit under my setup. It just it gives them kind of a home base for their amateur program. Um, and his question is a good one. I think the way I want to answer that is, and this is if I could give advice to anybody, racers especially, when I was growing up, and especially when I was at that age, like I was just talking about, that 15, 16, 17, kind of that turning point of amateur to pro, that turning point of, okay, my high school class is about to graduate, they're about to go to college, like my family's kind of like, all right, what the heck are you going to do with your life? And all I can remember is just showing up every year at Christmas time when I'd really just, that's when I'd see my grandpa and my grandma and my cousins, and I'd see everyone all together. I would always be badgered with that question of either, what are you going to do? And then the magic one, which was, well, what are you going to do when you're done racing? And I'm getting this question at 17 years old, 16 years old, when it's my first year pro. I'm just starting to make a name for myself. And that's the question I'm getting. So I think there's one way to, yeah, you need to absolutely. I think the problem, I'm going to try to word this the best I can. I really think that was the wrong question for them to be asking. I think that was a very close minded way to be looking at it. And it definitely made me question myself more than I should have been. I think the correct question for them to have been asking should have been, all right, AJ, what are you going to do to build your brand and to turn your name into a brand and sell yourself as you continue to race professional motocross, so that it opens up doors as you're racing so you can pursue these other opportunities. And it took a little bit for me to kind of understand, because at the beginning it was one or the other. It was, all right, do I just want to quit and just go to college and just take that normal path? Do I just want to quit and get a normal, job within the industry? Like, I was so torn for so many years on what to do. And then finally I'm like, well, I don't know why it took me so long to realize this, but I just finally made that decision to just grow my brand, to grow my motocross academy, to grow all of this stuff and race at the same time. And as I build one, the other kind of builds. And that way, hopefully it's sustainable enough to when I'm done racing that I can kind of go whichever route I'd like. And it opens up the opportunities and the doors to be able to choose whichever route I want. So for me, I think at an early age, I realized the importance of that. Maybe too much so, like to a fault, because I would constantly scare myself and worry about what I was going to do after rather than just worrying about getting on my dirt bike and riding it the best I could, which is definitely a problem. But
But I think you do have like a special brain for this kind of stuff, um, because you look at it as building a brand. That's not something that everybody is doing. They show up and they ride their dirt bike, and you've mentioned people already in this show that do that. Um, so I'm wondering where you got the knack for it, because obviously you have a very creative marketing mind, and without the formal background of a marketing education or anything like that, you have a knack for it. You have the social media down. You are building a brand, and you have some really creative ideas. Where does that come from, you think?
well, I think a lot of it has to do with the people I surround myself with is a big one. So, yourself. I've always hung out with older people. not to say you're that old, but like Rob Klingon, Jay Kavanaugh. I mean, these guys are all in their 40s. I would always hang out with an older group that kind of been there, done that. Um, you know, business people that were smart and kind of had their head on their shoulders. I wasn't hanging out with people my age and screwing around. And I think to an extent, I was getting those questions maybe a little bit too much that made me question whether I should be racing my dirt bike or not. But I was able to kind of download that information and turn that into how can I use that the best I can and still race my dirt bike. Because I think I had that aha moment, like that realization of you're only young once. I'm only going to be a professional motocross racer once in my life. So why am I going to cut myself short? Why am I going to retire at 22 years old? So now when people ask me, I'm proud of my. Before I'm like, oh well, maybe I'll do it for another year and I'll get out and I'll try to have a career somewhere else. Now I'm proud of my answer. I'm gonna do, and I just got this question from Allie's dad when we were on vacation this weekend, and I said I'm gonna do it as long as I can. If I'm 32, 33 years old and I can still feel like I'm in top physical shape and I can still ride my dirt bike to the best of my ability, I'm gonna go out and do it because I love to do it. And at that point, I'll be 7 years further into the business side of things to where I can hopefully at that point, things are starting to run themselves a little bit. The academy, I may not have to be so directly involved like I am now. Right now is the tough part to where a lot of this has just started in the past year or two, and I have my hands in everything.
So as long as my body feels physically fit and as long as I feel like I'm at the top of my game physically, I'm going to continue to do it. And at the same time, hopefully at that point, 6-7 years down the road, the academy, all of these things I'm putting into place and I've put into place the past couple of years have grown to a point to where they're kind of, running themselves in a way. And right now it's at the point where, I've sort of recently just jumped into so many things. I have my hand in the pot with so many different things. It's tough for me to give anyone that responsibility of helping me with it. Not that I think people have malintentions, but I just want to make sure it's done right and kind of done the way I want it to. Even with this podcast, I've given you a lot of the responsibility as far as setting it up and uploading and editing and it's a big responsibility. And typically, I wouldn't do that. You know what I mean? So it's tough. It's a lot of work, but I do enjoy the business end of it. I enjoy the racing part of it, obviously. And I'm just lucky to be able to make it work, I guess.
For sure. I have a bonus question.
Oh boy.
If you were not racing professionally and if motocross just fell through, like let's say you snapped both legs off when you were 15, what would you have wanted to do?
Okay, so I'm disabled or I just have to pick a different route?
Yeah, you just have to pick a different route. Like dirt
Okay.
bikes just fell off the face of the map and there was no future in it.
Okay.
And you had to pick something. Like where would you have seen yourself?
Definitely probably in another professional sport, but if I can't pick that,
Another professional sport.
I don't know. I would have definitely gone like BMX or, something like that, but that's too close. So let's go something totally different.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
I don't know. Like a fighter jet pilot or something sounds pretty cool. I don't know what I would have done. I always think about that. I'm like, I have such a need for that adrenaline. It couldn't have been something normal. There's no way.
So okay, so you would never be an accountant.
No, I could never be anything.
No office job. I got you.
It couldn't be a 9 to 5, no matter what the heck it was.
Well, you can't build anything, so
right.
you wouldn't be a fabricator either.
Definitely not.
Probably
Yeah,
not an electrician.
I
Definitely not in tech.
I would have been unemployed. I would have been a hippie that just bought a van and traveled the country driving a van around.
Could have been an
That might have been me.
artist.
What
You're a
what
decent artist.
what did you want to be growing up?
A professional supercross racer, man. Duh.
Did you want to be a professional something or other?
No, you know what? I had always thought that I was going to be an attorney, and when, and then actually, I was going to go to law school. Like I was all set to go to law school, and I was looking at about $80,000 of student loans for undergrad, and then law school was going to cost me another $100,000. So when I was like kind of doing the math, and this was 2000. It was right. I graduated undergrad 2009, and it was right after the financial crisis, and nobody was getting jobs, and
Wow.
even like the attorneys that I knew were not getting these high-paying jobs that attorneys once were. And I kind of made the cost benefit analysis, and I was like, do I really want to go in the hole another 100 grand? I think it was going to be 112,000 additional. Um,
Are
and
you
that's
glad
a
you went that
private.
route?
In hindsight, yeah. Like sometimes I'm like, damn, I really kind of wish I was an attorney. Especially after I watch all these like trial shows, like Making a Murderer. Like I'm like, damn it, I wish I could be in a courtroom. But at the same time, I wouldn't have the flexibility that I have. I wouldn't
Right.
have the family that I have. I wouldn't have the free time that I have. All my extracurriculars. I would not be able to do any of that. So like, there's something to be said for having a not an 80-hour work week that some of my attorney friends have. You know what I mean? So
Right.
yeah,
That alone would be worth it to me.
yeah.
You
I
know.
can't even imagine working 60 to 80 hours a week, because that's what a junior partner in a law firm is going to be doing, or an associate even. I mean, they're working stupid hours, and could the payoff be great? Yeah, but you need to be a workaholic, and you need to be addicted to it, and I don't know if I could ever be that.
Right. Yeah, I know. That's tough. I mean, some of it seems like I've I've been watching Law and Order before I go to bed every single night. And based on that, some of it seems like it could be exciting, but it's not like that. And I'm sure some of it
Right.
probably is cool and interesting, but I'd say more often than not, it's probably things that you don't want to be dealing with.
Right. Well, I mean, you think about it. You when everybody hears of lawyers, they're usually only hearing of lawyers on the news, and they're high profile lawyers, and they're doing high profile stuff, and those are few and far between. It's the same as a professional athlete. You could be a mediocre lawyer, you could be a public defender. You would never see a big payday. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I do think I missed the calling with something in the medical world, just because I am interested in it. But this podcast is about you, not me. So let's move on.
Oh, this is about us, man. Next question from Aaron. You want to read it?
Which Aaron?
Oh, we got multiple. Pendergast?
You read it. You read it. You have it right in front of you.
All right. So this is from Aaron Pendergast. I hope I'm saying that one right. So when it comes to racing, I have a high metabolism, and mixed with nerves, my body burns through calories and food really quick. It's hard to eat on race days. After the gate drops and about 2 to 3 laps into the race, my body feels like it's eating itself, sometimes painful. What do you recommend eating, and how long before the moto do you recommend eating? Struggle busting over here. And
Well,
that resonated with me right away.
Me too. And one of the primary reasons why I did was because Aaron, AJ is the absolute worst person to ask this question. Absolute worst person. Because I think you'd be the first to admit your diet on race day is not ideal.
No, but I have his same exact problem.
Right.
But I don't necessarily fix it.
Well, I mean, it's hard. It's hard to get nutrients in on race day. Anything. I mean, that's my struggle for any race or competitive situation I'm in. They all start early. Especially afternoon race. I mean, for crying out loud, you're up at 4:35 in the morning. You have to be at the track ASAP. You don't have time to get all your nutrients in, and then you're just kind of the rest of the day is just scrambling around, and it's freaking hard to eat good.
Not to
You don't
mention we're
have
in
a
the middle of
private
a
chef.
city and in a stadium, and you can't get access. You don't have access to any good food. So for me, it's a little bit different. Like it's actually hard to get the quality food that you need. It definitely takes a lot of pre-planning to do so. But let's assume that that's not his situation, and that
Yeah,
he
if you
has
want to talk
access.
just about diet, because I think there was another diet related question, and I don't know which one specifically, but there was another diet related question. So we'll kind of just cover diet and what we think about the diet, and if all the conditions are ideal and you have time to meal prep before, the night before, the day before, whatever, what you should be eating. Um, I think you should definitely, if look, motocross is a very carbohydrate demanding sport. So I think you should definitely be getting in some good carbohydrates and not carb loading with pasta before the night before. Fruits, vegetables, bioavailable carbohydrates that are quickly metabolized and quickly utilized.
The day
I
of
think
the
those
event
are the day of the event, and
and
even
all
the day
throughout.
before.
And well, and everyone's different too. That's the thing. And I've spent I'm 25 years old now. I've spent since I was 16 years old trying to figure this out and what works, what doesn't. I've tried the whole carb loading the night before. It didn't work. Because guess what? I'm eating a whole bunch of carbs and pasta. By the time I walk back to the hotel or get in the car, go back to the hotel, or get into bed, I've already burnt all that off.
Well, not to mention like carbohydrates and pasta in particular, they're not satiating, so you don't feel full. When you have like a high protein, you feel full for a longer time. So balance, I think, the carbohydrate with a protein, whether it's eggs, chicken, a lean protein, because that's going to make you feel full. If you get up to the line or you get through midway through a race and you're starving, you've probably not had enough protein. Because your body burns through carbohydrates and they don't make you full. So you want to balance that. AJ, you do a pretty good job. And you usually have several eggs before a race. If not anything else, you definitely get your eggs in.
Yeah, I always have a steak the night before a race. Some might argue that that's not the right thing to do. It seems to work for me. The morning of a race, I'll definitely have eggs. Um, the and I, it's tough. It's hard to eat. Those eggs don't taste good the morning of a race. I don't want to eat them, but eat them. I mean, it's pretty easy to shove down 3 or 4 eggs, in like a minute. Just eat them. Throughout the day, I always have like gels or goos or like little applesauce packets, just little things I could be nibbling on that are easy for me to get down.
Yep. To restore your glycogen. I mean, you're burning a lot of fuel during Supercross, motocross. So you definitely want stuff that you can quickly restore those carbohydrates and your glycogen stores. So like AJ does the applesauces. I think like some of the gels or the chews like Scratch. AJ and I both heavily rely on Scratch, and
Yep,
and we'll
I'm
get to that
drinking it
because
as we speak.
hydration. Yep, me too. So hydration is another variable here that's really pivotal. So obviously your body is a big electrical system, and those electrical systems are powered by salts, sodium, potassium, um, all those things that are needed to facilitate muscle movement and performance. You got to replenish those. So chugging water is helpful. It's definitely better than nothing, but you don't want just straight water. You want something with a little electrolyte in it, and not Gatorade that's high sugar and a bunch of kind of filler crap,
Right.
but a very refined, specific electrolyte restoration drink. So AJ and I both use Scratch. My cycling team is sponsored by them, so um, I've been using them for quite a while, and it's actually, you know what? I think AJ, you might have even started using it before I did, but it's a good electrolyte drink. It has magnesium in it, which is a one that's often overlooked by like a sports drink that you might think of. And magnesium is proven to limit cramping That's a big one. And it's also a simple sugar, so it has some energy uh, characteristics to it. So it's fuel, it's replenishment, and I think hydration is another big key.
And for me with those drinks, there's a couple key factors. One, and you might do the same thing, is I drink it all day long. I just do a light mix of it all day. So I need something that's not going to dry my mouth out. Because some of them, if it's maybe if you're mixing it too heavy, or some of them depending on the ingredients and the combination of whatever the heck's in there, it might dry your mouth out a bit. That's one big factor. And then the other factor, a product like Scratch as opposed to, or Rhino Power Hydration Fuel, something like that's more natural like that, as opposed to a Gatorade, is it doesn't have those artificial flavors, I don't believe. So
Nope, it's
not
all
as
fruit
sweet.
flavored.
So like you could drink it all day, and it's not like
It's easier on the
disgusting.
stomach for
Right.
sure.
It's not like it's
Like
going to destroy your
Gatorade
taste
is,
buds, like drinking a lemonade.
I
all
cannot
day
drink. I can't drink Gatorade or Powerade. Like that stuff is so heavy. It like makes my spit thick, and like when I'm breathing heavy, it's like the last
Right.
thing that I could possibly imagine drinking. It just like it dries my mouth out, like you said. But it's kind of weird because it's like makes like a thick spit that you just it's gross.
Yep.
So stick to one of those more natural supplements for hydration for
And
sure.
it's so huge. I mean, for me, I'm a big cramper. I get Charlie horses all the time. At Straight Rhythm, for example, which is the last race I did, I was lining up for the final with Carson Brown. So this is at the end of the day. We've done free practice, time qualifying, all of my bracket racing. I didn't, and I forgot my Scratch, or it exploded on the plane. I forget what happened. I think like I had it and either TSA took it, something happened. I didn't have it. So I went all day without it, and I'm on the line. They load us into the tunnel, and Jeremiah is there. He sets my whole shot device, and then I go to put it in gear and pull the clutch in. I pull the clutch in, and my whole hand just starts to go like rigor mortis, like contorted on me. And I'm like, oh no. I look over at Jeremiah, and I'm like, Jeremiah, I'm going, my whole body's cramping. I didn't have any salt today. Like, this is not good. And it'll get to the point where my whole body will start to do it. And I know a lot of cases aren't that bad, but mine's super extreme. So hydration for me is always number one on the list.
And it's important to remember also with those hydration stuff, like you should drink it an hour before physical activity. It takes about an hour for the electrolytes to kind of be digested and do what they got to do. So AJ, your tactic of drinking it steadily all day is certainly beneficial. No doubt about it.
After the activity is important as well, because you got to replenish everything that you just sweated out, right? Sweat. But speaking to his situation specifically and having a high metabolism, because I certainly have this problem.
Same.
I use weight gainer in my protein shakes on a daily basis, twice a day. The reason being, I don't know if it's good for you. I don't really know necessarily. I've run the ingredients by my trainer and by a couple people, and they seemed like it was okay. A normal serving of protein has anywhere between probably 120 and 220 calories per serving, where my weight gainer has 1,350 calories per serving. I'm having that in a shake with almond butter, almond milk, a banana. So my shake is upwards of 1,700 to 2,000 calories, and I'm having 2 of those a day. So for me, those are tasty. They're easy to get down. They keep me full for a long period of time. I don't have a sensitive stomach, so it's not like it's gonna like give me the shits or anything crazy. Like I can withstand just about anything as far as that goes. I know some people wouldn't be able to eat that many calories and deal with it. But I think on race day, it might not be a bad idea to just get a little scoop of some weight gainer and throw it in a shaker cup and just mix it with some almond milk and just drink it down. Just have a couple sips of it here and there. Get the calories in you, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good point with the almond milk too, because even most people have somewhat of a lactose intolerance, whether it's like really pronounced with a sip of milk or whether it's like you have to drink a gallon of it. To be easy on your stomach, if you're concerned about that, I think that's a good point. Use almond milk, at least
Do
in
you
that
drink
case.
milk?
I don't. I really found that I milk was a variable that was really turning my stomach,
Same.
and the
And
and
I have a good stomach too, and milk was messing me up.
and I love milk. I really
Hmm.
like chocolate milk, and so for a while I was doing the Fairlife chocolate milk for like post workout. Um, that's one of those bro science things that you hear, like, oh yeah, drink chocolate milk at the end of a workout, which is there's some truth to it. I mean, it has a lot of protein, for the volume. It's got good sugar,
Hmm.
but and that's actually lactose free, so that isn't too terrible. But I just there's other reasons where I try to limit dairy. Um, I cut ice cream, which was big for me because I used to be a like ice cream addict, but I was finding that I was getting more and more sensitive to the dairy. It was just like making my stomach hurt. So personally, I cut it out. I just do almond milk now.
Right. And for those that are listening and drink a lot of dairy or drink a lot of milk or consume a lot of dairy, I would definitely consider cutting that down because I'm not necessarily a freak on diet, but I've cut out basically all of my dairy, um, and I'd say a good portion of my gluten as well. Um, and yeah, I cheat all the time, but for the most part, like because the problem was before I would wake up, I'd have a bowl of cereal. I would have my protein shake with milk. Sometimes I'd have a bowl of cereal as a snack. And then before I go to bed, I'd have ice cream. Like,
Yep.
holy cow, that's just all lactose all day long. And I think I just formed an intolerance to it.
Yeah, I think there was it was one of Joe Rogan's podcasts. I don't know if it was the Lane Norton one. Um, they were talking about like whey sensitivities, whey allergies, lactose intolerances, and stuff like that. So it is a very common thing. I mean, don't think that it isn't. It is, and there's a lot of research that would suggest that like human beings shouldn't really have any lactose. This is just one person. I'm not a dietitian. I'm not a nutritionist, but I think between you and I, we have an above average understanding of nutrition and stuff. But between all of our research, um, but yeah, I mean, just go with the almond milk.
Right. And just play around with different stuff too. Like, see what works for you, see what doesn't. Like I said, it took me years of kind of guess and check to see what worked, and what doesn't. I'm still constantly tailoring it to try to make it better and better. But point being, you have to eat on race day. You have to eat the day before race day. Like, just look at your body as like your dirt bike, and you're not gonna put shit fuel in your dirt bike. Don't put crappy fuel in your body. Don't put no fuel in your body because you're gonna run out of gas. Like, constantly be putting just a little bit in it all day long.
And I don't want to open up Pandora's box here with diet, but there is something to be said about the ketogenic diet for some people, and not in a fad sense. I know it's like a kind of a fad word right now is ketogenic diet, but actually kind of committing yourself to going into ketosis. And for those of you who do not know what that is, your body burns carbohydrate as a primary fuel source. What ketogenesis is your body making the transition from burning carbohydrate as fuel to burning fat as fuel, and it takes a big commitment to do, and there's a lot of learning curve. But if you can get your body to adapt to no carbohydrate and burning fat as a fuel source, a lot of people have big benefits, performance wise, feeling wise. I've never done it. I don't want to do it. It's not for me personally. I don't find the need for it. But a lot of people who do go into exercise, or find that they're sluggish, or find that their body's shutting down and are not getting carbohydrates, or you know um, something like that, they do find a big benefit in the ketogenic diet. So it's
I'd say
something to look
it's worth
into.
trying if you really feel like crap. I mean, it's worth trying. Like Bryce said, he's not going to go try it because feels pretty dialed in. I myself feel pretty dialed in. I'll make small minor adjustments, but I'm not going to go make a drastic change like that. But some people might be in a situation where what are you going to lose? I mean, it's not. I don't think science has proven that it's unhealthy for you. I don't think there's too many risks. Just takes that commitment to doing it the right way. Well, moving on.
Do you want to get into Kate's question? It's almost like a decent segue into that.
Kate's question, was that about the warm-ups?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Let's so from Kate S. Here, this is a question. This made me giggle a little bit because I've actually, believe it or not, I get this question all the time. And when I first started getting into fitness, this might have been a question that I myself actually asked. She said, "I'm just getting into motocross and was wondering why all the riders use an exercise bike in the pits at all the races. I know I'm just starting out and out of shape, but after I get off the bike, my legs feel like mush. Wouldn't that tire them out and waste energy needed for the race?" So, do you want to start?
You know me, AJ. You're the expert from the moto standpoint, but you know me. I need a warm up.
Yeah.
I hate going into something hard cold. So, Kate, for your own knowledge, warming up is really critical for anybody. Your body, it's like turning your car on and then trying to go race with it. You know, you need to get that oil warmed up. You need to get the motor up to temperature before you really hammer on it. The same goes with your body. You're not going to take your bike out of the shed, turn it on, and just go hit the rev limiter without warming it up first and kind of getting it to operating temperature. Same goes with your body. So getting a proper warm up in, and AJ is going to go into a little bit more specifics with his because he did a lot of analysis and actual scientific testing through his fitness. And he could speak more to the different zones that you should be in for an ideal warm up because he has that actual physical data. But just for a general overview, warming up is key because what it does is it warms up. It physically warms your body, so your body's actually getting up to a temperature that's going to better facilitate the actual performance of your muscles. So with that, it's increasing your blood volume or your blood flow. Your during a warm up, your arteries and veins and blood vessels, they all dilate. So you're actually going to be able to put more blood and there go more oxygen into your body. It increases your flexibility, your range of motion. You get your body up to temperature. You're going to be able to kind of push it a little bit farther. So there's definitely some huge benefits to warming up. But AJ can go into a little more specifics with regard to like zones for that.
And if your concern is that it's going to tire you out, there's a couple of answers to that. One, either the individual is, you'd have to be really, really out of shape for that, for you to, so to speak, burn your matches or tire yourself out. And or you could be doing the warm up completely the wrong way. So you're not going out and doing 45 minutes at zone 5 heart rate. You know what I mean? You're so what I'm going to do is I've done multiple VO2 max tests with my metabolic specialist, and he gave me this sheet, and it's all about, for my body specifically, but this would be a really good guideline for really anybody. This is like the ideal warm up. And it says this warm up below is specific to you. Completing this warm up prior to most exercise will be important for 3 reasons. 1, burn more fat during your workout. 2, lower your risk for injury. And 3, it will be easier and more comfortable to sustain higher intensities during your workout. So my total warm up should be 10 minutes. 10 minutes total. And the key here is to have this 10-minute warm up within 10 minutes of your activity. So don't go do your 10-minute warm up and then sit on the couch for or in the pit area for 30 minutes and then go line up, because then you wasted 10 minutes of energy that you should have probably been saving. Make sure that 10 minutes is done, then you're pretty much going right down to the line. So for me, first 2 minutes, and he's got it based on wattage here if I were on a bike, so he's just got 100 watts, but that equates to 104 beats per minute. So 2 minutes, 104 beats per minute. 104, you're looking at, that's sub zone 1 for me. So my zone 1 here, it says 119 to 146. That's sub zone 1. So you're basically just spinning your legs out, getting your engine kind of started up a little bit. Next 2 minutes, 140 watts, 119 beats per minute. So again, that's just starting to tip into zone 1 there. So you're kind of just starting to get warmed up a little bit. 2 more minutes, 180 watts. Now you're jumping up to 139 beats per minute. Now it's starting to get to the higher end of zone 1. Next 2 minutes, 220 watts. That's 155 beats per minute. Now we've made the jump from zone 1 into zone 2. And my zone 2 is pretty small. It's from 147 to 158. So you spend the 2 minutes in zone 2. And then we got 2 minutes, 260 watts at 169. So that's going up to zone 3. And then honestly, what I would suggest is about 10 to 15 seconds bumping up into a zone 4 range, which for me is going anywhere past my threshold, which is 172 beats per minute. Anything above that is above my threshold. So I would say spend 10 or 15 seconds in that. And that's that. That's your warm up. You could maybe spin out for another minute or two at 100 watts, sub 100 watts, let your heart rate gradually come back down, right? But a workout like that, a warm up like that, 10 to 12 minutes, it's not going to turn your legs to mush. If it's turning your legs to mush, I would really, really...
you're pedaling too hard. You're pedaling too hard. That's really kind of what it is.
If you're following that guideline and your legs are mush, you got some problems.
Right. And I think there's some muscle physiology that comes into play too. I mean, you're utilizing different muscle groups cycling versus motocross. You're using a lot of fast twitch and slow twitch muscle differences. We talked about that in another podcast, but some are used for more explosive kind of power, like the squatting that you're doing on a motocross bike versus the long endurance that you're doing on a bicycle. So it's a little bit of a different muscle physiology, but it's all accomplishing the same thing. You're getting your body warmed up. I mean, it's a cliche thing to say, but you're physically warming it up. You're increasing the dilation of your blood vessels. You're getting your blood flowing. And one thing that a lot of people overlook during a warm up is your lungs. There's muscles in your rib cage that need to warm up too. If you ever go outside and start doing a hard physical activity in the cold, your lungs burning. A lot of that is to do with the muscles that are on either side of your rib cage, and that actually help your rib cage expand and contract with your diaphragm. That's them being cold prior to going to exert yourself outside. So the part of that warm up is to warm up your lungs, the muscles controlling your lungs too, so you can get oxygen during the activity.
And as I'm sitting here looking at this test, it's super interesting because they put side by side the breakdown of my warm up and then the breakdown of my actual VO2 max test. So you can see in my warm up, my fat percentage goes from 100 to 16% within 6 minutes. I'm talking, I almost instantly go from burning primarily fat to burning primarily sugars. After the warm-up, we took a 5-7 minute break. We hopped into my actual test. That process was delayed by quite some time. And there's so many numbers in here, it gets super confusing. But I'm talking, it took until about the 15-minute mark to where I got to that same fat, that 16% fat, where I got closer and closer to my threshold. So it kind of delays that. It just makes you more efficient. Right? And I know a lot of people, me especially when I was young, same thing where I avoided doing all the stretching like I was supposed to. I avoided doing the proper warm-up. But now it's something that I've learned that it's just equally as important as the workout itself, right?
I would agree. And with specific regard to stretching, and one thing that even I need to do a better job on is they say to not do any static stretching before activity. Do dynamic stretching before activity. So if you are going to implement a warm up, you should be stretching your muscles before strenuous activity, whether on the bike or at the gym or whatever. But they really recommend to do dynamic stretches. So before the muscle is warmed up and really pliable, you lead yourself to injury by just doing a static stretch. Static stretch is anything like that you remember from gym class.
Right.
You're getting your leg up on the table and you're not moving and you're kind of just doing that stretch. Those static stretches should be reserved for after activity where your muscles warmed up, it's more pliable, you're going to reduce your risk of injury, you're going to get the stretch, but beforehand you could implement things like leg raises. You're doing extending your leg and kind of doing high kicks,
Right, like leg
back and
swings
forth.
or like bear hugs, whatever you want to call them, stuff like that.
Yep.
Yep,
But all those are definitely key.
and that's something that I implement as well into my kind of activation, which we talked about last episode. It's all done before I go out, and then when I get done, just like when I get done on the bicycle, I come back in, I foam roll out, which foam rolling can be done before too. I kind of foam roll all the time, but then I do my static stretching when I'm done. But that was a good question. I think a lot of people are confused on that and maybe confused on when it should take place and how long and how, what's too much and what's not enough. And my answer to that would be just rewind this video, listen to that breakdown, and don't be afraid. Like, you should be sweating. You should be out of breath at the end of it, right? Because you are going through all of your zones. You're priming all of your heart rate zones. And don't be afraid that that's going to wear you out too much. If that 12 minutes wears you out too much, then you definitely got to get in better shape. But I would be very surprised for any individual if that 10 or 12-minute warm up ruined you.
I would say that if you don't notice a dramatic improvement after a warm up, after doing a good warm up, I'd be shocked. I mean, even think about how many times, AJ, I've gone out and I'll send you a screenshot. I took the Q&amp segment somewhere mountain biking or whatever. And you're like, how? I was like, yeah, I rode my bike to the trail. And he's like, you're like, yeah, I guarantee you that's because you had a good warm up.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, you're right.
Yep.
So
exactly. All right. Well, moving on. What's next in the order? Do we have Eric Schmidt? Do you have one?
Yeah, you can go there.
All right. So now and guys, keep in mind we're getting a lot of very similar questions. So, and we got a lot of emails. So we're going to try to answer as many questions as we can, but obviously not everyone's question is going to be answered. So we got one from Eric Schmidt here. It says, "Can you pick a single?" Go ahead.
And just to go along with that, there's a lot of overlap in some of these questions. So this question, AJ is going to read Eric Schmidt's question, but Mark Winnie also had a very similar question that we're going to dive into as well.
Right. So even if I'm not reading your exact email, definitely listen to the question being asked, because there was definitely a lot of repeats or very similar questions. So Eric Schmidt asked, "Can you pick a single aspect, whether it be a factory bike, motor/suspension package, trainer, focus/endurance, to ride at an extremely high level for full motos, natural ability, willingness to take bigger and more frequent chances, or something else that puts the Tomac, Roxons, Andersons, etc. at another level from other professionals? Obviously, it takes all of the above and more, but there is something that stands out. But is there something that stands out that you might want that, man, I'm struggling to read here, that might be more influential than the others?" So this is a good question. And if I knew the exact answer to it, I would probably be a Tomac or a Roxon or an Anderson. But let me ask you that, Bryce. What, from the outside, not necessarily outside, but a little bit of the outside looking in, what would you consider to be the biggest separator between the top guys?
You're not going to like my answer, but I'll give it to you anyway. And I think that it comes down to some people are just better and different than other people. And I guess I would just encapsulate it in one word, and I would say genetics. I mean, you can make a lot out of nothing for the average person. I mean, if you were to dedicate your 10,000 hours and you put your mind to it and you could do anything you want to do, I genuinely believe there's a place at the top for a lot of those people. But at the end of the day, there's just going to be those people who are worlds apart just because that's what God decided to do, or whatever you believe in decided to do to those people. Um, I don't know. Can you, AJ, I'm asking you this in particular. Could you point to something about like those three guys in particular, the Mooskins, the Andersons, the Tomacs, and say, oh yeah, that's exactly why they're the way they are?
Well, it's such a loaded question because you could easily also argue the fact that you just made that if pound for pound you put me up, but then again, we're speaking generally as an all-around athlete. None of those guys would be more of an athlete than myself. You know, the only one I could think of, Tomac, is definitely an all-around athlete. Roxon is as well. But look at Anderson. Anderson's not even close.
Well,
Mooskin, absolutely not. But at the same time,
but that's what I'm saying. Like, I think like there's something. I think Anderson's a prime example of this, in just the way anybody watching, even if they had no idea about Supercross and all the intricacies involved, they watch Anderson ride. His brain works differently.
uh-huh,
He is like quintessential T-type personality, like no risk aversion whatsoever.
right.
Just hammers it, goes after it, and if it works, it works, and it worked 99% of the time last season, and that's why he won.
So
But
genetically, you're
there's
not just talking physical attributes. You're talking
right. I'm not
mental,
just saying like, oh,
mental game, the
yes,
whole deal.
exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Like I guess you could boil it down to some things just can't be taught.
Mhm.
You're either born with it or you're not.
Yeah. I think that's a good point because if you're putting those in the same category, which I believe is kind of true in a sense, like there's those people out there that have that unwavering belief in themselves no matter what. It doesn't come around often, but there's those people out there. The guys at the top of the sport, like look at a Roxon, and then look at him get hurt, and then get hurt again, and come back and be
Mm-hmm.
right back at the top instantly. That's special. I mean that no, I don't have that,
You can't teach that. Yeah,
and
nobody's gonna
I'm
do any
I'm
amount of mental
pretty
training to
special.
get there. That
You know, like compared to the normal
oh, you're
person.
special, all right.
But there's levels to it, you know, like I'm worlds apart from the normal person in that aspect. Like, but then you compare me mentally, there's even that other level of, and even a little bit of that, like he said in this email, kind of that disregard. How did he word it? Willingness to take bigger and more frequent chances. Those guys all do it. They take those chances constantly and they don't think anything of it. A guy like Justin Barsha, look at how many chances he takes when he's on the bike and how many mistakes he makes when he rides, but it truly doesn't phase him. Where me, on the other hand, I'm thinking about everything I'm doing when I'm on the bike, and when I make a mistake, even if no one noticed it, I felt like I almost crashed, and I feel like I need to kind of back off and slow down. And it's like it's just this huge problem that I've always had, and trust me, I work on it constantly, and I go to, you know, I have a hypnotist, I have mental coaches, I practice to try to make my mind better. And like I said, I'm better than most. Like even look at where you are now, Bryce, compared to where you were a year and a half ago. There was such a separation between you and I mentally. I could push, push, push on that bike until, you know, my legs exploded and I would never give up. And even though
Mm-hmm.
like our physical differences maybe weren't as big as it was showing time wise on the bikes, you would give up a lot earlier than I would. And now
Right.
that separate, like that level has diminished a lot, because I can see with you, you're able to kind of push past that point a heck of a lot further than you were a couple years ago.
You know why? Is because you started to get within striking distance. Like before, I didn't have any reason to push myself. Like I didn't have a dog in the fight, but and I was just, you were so far ahead of me that I was like, fuck it. But now it's like you're in my grasp, so that gives me motivation. I guess everybody just kind of has to find that
Right.
little piece of motivation, something that they can kind of grab onto and chase. And that's what you've become for me, is just like the carrot that's being dangled in front of me. And yeah, I think that gives me a little bit of motivation.
Yeah, I hear that. And I need to find that, I guess, a little bit this year with Supercross. Like, and we, again,
Well, that's
like,
why I
listen
suggested I make my name Eli Tomac on Zwift.
Yeah.
You could just get used to chasing me.
Yeah, which you mentioned that yesterday and we laughed at it, but at the same time, like, you know, the mind works in weird ways. And again, we could talk about the mental game all day long. Listen to the last episode, episode 5. If you missed it, go listen to it. Eric, if you didn't listen to it, go listen to it. But maybe diving into some of the other things he asked about, like, you want to touch on that. So, obviously, yeah, all of it plays a factor. I think what we just discussed is probably the biggest one, and unfortunately, like, you can't be taught it, which sucks. But you have bike and motor, suspension package. Yeah, sure, those guys, they're on better equipment. But if you put us all on the same bikes, I'd say that the results would still probably be pretty darn close to the same. The gap might be a little bit less. I think those guys are still going to find a way to separate themselves. What are your thoughts on his other points?
Well, I mean, you could speak to the bike setups and everything like that. I guess I would just kind of condense his question into my own question and say, what percentage do you think the bikes, factory bikes versus privateer bikes, your bikes in particular, what percentage would you give that as a factor?
It's tough to say. Well, go watch Red Bull Straight Rhythm this year as an example, and look at a guy like Christoph Porcel versus me. I got second. I pretty much basically tied for the win. Like, it was a photo finish. Porcel got 4th or 5th or 6th, maybe 6th. I've never beaten Christoph Porcel in my life. He's a world champion, I think. Believe he's won a lights championship in Supercross. Again, I could be wrong on that, but he was nonetheless a top guy. Always on the best equipment. Always rode for Pro Circuit Kawasaki. But then when he put us on, everyone on kind of equal 125s, it just evened that playing field out a lot. I think it's a pretty big factor.
I don't know if that's apples to apples.
No.
Yeah?
No, well, no, because it's also not Supercross, but it's Supercross style. I think it's a factor, but it's also a big factor on, like, the whole mental part of it. And what I like to,
Right, you believe you're on the best equipment, you're going to perform like you're on the best equipment.
Yeah.
I agree. I would think that you're right. It does contribute. It adds to confidence. You know, you have the backing of a great bike, a great team, a great team of mechanics, like the ability to swap motors if you need to. I mean, you blow a motor, you're done.
Yeah, the example I always make is with my second to last year as an amateur, and I think this was 2007, 2008, right when I got on a big bike. I interviewed for a spot for they had this program called Extreme Team Green Kawasaki, and it was like the elite guys. It was Dean Wilson, I forget who else, maybe Justin Bogle, but myself and Malcolm Stewart interviewed for it at the same time. It was either me and Malcolm or me and Justin Bogle. Either way, we interviewed for it at the same time at Minio's that year. all three of us, myself, Malcolm, and Bogle, were the same speed. Nothing was separating. Like, that's why they interviewed us. Like, who interviews to pick for a spot? It was kind of an odd situation. All three of us were in very similar spots. And they ended up going with either Malcolm or Justin or both, and not me. And I think a lot of it had to do with my dad was at the interview, and he is my dad was a total spaz. It definitely scared him away. But it was with Bobby Hewitt, who's now manager of the Rockstar Husqvarna team. He managed that team at the time. And you saw immediately, as soon as those guys got the ride and they got in the good equipment, something changed. And their paths just went a different way than mine, right from that day. And it just made it very difficult for my mind to kind of click. And I was on some really bad equipment at that time too, because my dad and I we were trying to get by. I was on the worst of the worst. And yeah, it's kind of an uphill battle mentally since then. Not necessarily equipment, but mentally.
Right. And I think probably the boost that they got from a confidence standpoint, you got the exact opposite in the negative feedback, like not feeling like you earned it or
Right.
got it or you were shortchanged in some way. Like, yeah, I mean so I think there's something to be said about bringing it back to the mental side of things. Because really at the end of the day, I mean, how much different, like I'd be really curious to hold every single variable constant and just look at the bikes. I know that's impossible to do, but I would be really curious about you hold every single variable constant and you just look at your bike versus Tomac's bike and you send it around the track. I want to know what the difference in time would be.
The only experience I have from that, from what I can remember, is I've ridden a couple JGR 450s. So I rode Nicoletti's 450 practice bike, which don't tell anyone. I don't think I was supposed to ride these things. But I also rode Davey Millsap's practice JGR 450 back in 2012. And all I know is both, and granted that's Yamaha 450, both of them were way too fast, and I didn't want anything to do with them. I rode them for like 2 laps, and I'm like, this sucks. I don't want to ride it, and I hopped off. And that's a factory. That's a JGR 450, right? So granted, they're. I think that's the key thing, is that they're not going for speed in those bikes. Those bikes are set up specifically to how those guys want them. And I think that's the key thing, is there's certain things in my bike where if you were to say, hey, AJ, what do you want? I could list off 3 or 4 things that I want so bad on my bike that I don't have now, that are specific to my needs. And other people may be like, oh, why do you want that? But they're important to me and to make me feel comfortable.
Like what?
Like front brake, for example. So last year, and this made a big difference last year, is we put a KTM master cylinder for a front brake on my Cowie because the front brakes were so bad it was pumping my arm up, and I just didn't have a good feel on the front brake. So we put the KTM master cylinder on it, and it was amazing. That made a huge difference right there alone. And then a couple things, like as far as suspension goes, like getting super nitpicky. I've always had an issue with this one, like very specific attribute of the like high speed, not like blowing through. So like the high speed setting, like hitting a hard wall out of nowhere, or hitting that really steep G out. I've always felt like no matter what bike I've been on, that it's not handling it correctly. And if I could fix that one problem, I feel like I'd be a lot more comfortable and could just attack things with a little bit more confidence. Just little silly things, like I would, in fact, I'd be like, if they asked me how I wanted the power of the bike, I would tell them I want it just to be a little bit slower. Another big thing is those guys have their custom transmissions so that they can't hit neutral, or it's very, very difficult to hit neutral. I would definitely want that because they're able to use first gear in a lot of situations where I'm afraid to go down to first gear because if I shift up to
Okay.
second in the air, the chance of me hitting neutral is it's about a 50-50 shot, which I don't like to take that chance. So I just will leave it in second. But it's it's minor things. It's not going to bring you from a 20th place guy to a top 3 guy, but it very well could bring you from a 20th place guy to a 13th to 15th place guy.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I do think, like, coming back to this question, I do think that those 3 guys, the Anderson, the Tomacs, the Mooskins, I think as a whole, those 3 are the definite outliers. I mean, you look at the rest of the field, anybody could be anywhere. If you're trying to make that Rocky Mountain ATV MC fantasy picks, who the heck knows? So I think they're a good example of 3 people who just are on a different level. I mean, take all those other little things out of the equation. I don't know if you can teach that. I really don't, or learn it or practice it. And you could, and I think 4th place through 22nd, you have a huge opportunity to improve oneself. To go from 22nd to 8th,
Right,
or 19th to 6th.
right.
But to get from the 16th to 15th up to thirds, although Barsha last year something clicked with him, so I'd be interested to pick his brain on what it was.
Yeah, well, that's just Bear.
Oh, hi, Bear.
That's just very obviously
Our unofficial podcast mascot.
Bear is the sponsor of this episode. I mean, the Barsha situation was just very obviously a mental block. There was a few years where things didn't go his way, and it's hard to dig yourself out of that hole. And then all it took was a couple good races, and then you kind of saw the old Barsha come back. So it just goes to prove even more like we're gonna always continue to bring it back to the mental side of things, even though it's such like an inconclusive way almost to answer that question. People wish that it were a more simple answer than that. Yeah, but it's not.
Well, here's another question from Shane Fricchetti. Hopefully that I pronounced that right. Sorry if I didn't. Best way to get over the mental part of racing. And we're just going to refer you back to, along with where we just left off the other question, is refer back to our episode 5 with Jay Kavanaugh talking about the mental game. And he laid out a bunch of strategies. We talked about a few different ways that we could try to get better at overcoming that stuff. That's Shane. I mean, that's a question that AJ battles, that I battle, that everybody battles, and I wish we had a better answer for you. But go back and listen to that other episode with Jay.
And we'll continue to have people on, and Jay will come back. I'm sure we'll talk about. We'll go more and more in depth. I mean, it's a never-ending conversation, and it's something I'm very interested in always talking about because it plays a factor in every role. It really does. But before we get ourselves down that hole for another 2 hours, let's. What are you seeing? I'm seeing just one more question left from John. Do you have other ones?
No, I think. Look, I think there's a bunch. We tried to cover a bunch of them within some of our answers.
We got a couple as we were on this podcast, actually, but let's end it with John. And this was kind of a specific question, but for any of you moto dads out there, I know it's definitely a topic of conversation and something I get asked all the time. So I think this is worth kind of going over at least for a little bit. You want me to read it?
Go ahead.
This is from John. Just keep it in simple, no last names, Jon. Hey, AJ and Bryce. Oh, and he said hi to Bryce. I like this guy already.
Yeah. Thanks, John.
I cannot use the gear for my son as he's contracted to fly, blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool. So he emailed anyway. My son is 11 and riding both 65 and 85 bikes. 2019 will be his last year on the 65. He's pretty competitive with the 9th overall at Mini-O's and made it to Loretta's. Okay, so he's definitely fast. We can't afford to send him to a training facility, and he goes to public school. Same boat as me. So he gets training once in a while with a local trainer, and the rest of the time he's working with me. Parentheses, coach dad. He really wants to be the top of the class next year, and he has the drive and talent to do it. My questions are, should I focus just on the 65 or mix it up between the 65 and 85? Second part of his question, he says, we ride at a private track. How do I keep it interesting for Logan riding the same track for training? We work individual corners and do time motos, but I don't want to get him burned out doing the same thing all the time. Thanks. And I've only gotten a list of one podcast so far, and it's great. Cool. Thanks, John. Okay. So let's start with the first part of that question. So, and Bryce, you might be able to learn a little bit from this as well, because this is,
I'm all ears. This is all
you're
you.
probably wondering kind of what he's talking about in a sense. So obviously as an amateur, the classes at a national level aren't separated by skill level like they are at a local level. They'd be separated by A, B, and C. At the national level, they're simply separated by age groups. So his son being 11, he's in his second to last year of the 65 class. So there's, depending on when his birthday is, I'm assuming he has a good birthday. So there's a 10 to 11 class, and they might have changed it since I was an amateur. Maybe it's 9 to 11, 7 to 11, who knows. He's got one more year left in the 65 class, and he's got a couple more years left in the 85. So when I was 11, I was on a 65 and 85, especially with him being 9th overall at Mini-O's, which is a big national. That's really good, making it to Loretta's, which is the biggest national in the world, really, biggest amateur national in the world. That's awesome just to be able to qualify. So he's competitive nonetheless. My advice would be to continue to ride both bikes. Don't just pick the 65. Don't just pick the 85 unless he's too giant, especially if you guys want to try to be top of that 65 class next year. Keep him on both. There was a time where I was on a 50, a 65, and an 85 all at the same time for like a 3-month time period. But there was a couple years, or at least a year and a half, where I was on a 65 and then an 85 at the same time. He's going to probably hate one or the other. It's very difficult transition. It's hard to do in the same day, especially. But what my dad would do is he would always bring both when we'd go to the practice track. So that way I would do a moto on one, I'd hop off, and I'd go do a moto on the other one without a warm-up. So it just kind of gave me that race day replica. But that's tough. Don't hold them back too late on the bike. Just like when parents will ask me how long they should keep their kid in the C class, or how long should I stay in the C class. Don't hold yourself back. But at the same time, like if you think you could go be top 3, top 5 at Loretta's next year, then I would say definitely go for it. As far as practicing on the same track, so I have some advice for this. Last year, I have my own personal supercross track. I rode that track every single day for months on end, especially being a supercross track. Gets very, very repetitive, being that it's only 50 seconds and you're just going round and round and round. Outdoor track, yeah, it's going to get pretty repetitive if you're riding it every day. My advice would be either use cones or just kind of do it on your own. Pick a day to go ride inside lines, then pick a day to go ride outside lines. And just doing that alone is going to make the track feel very different. It's going to make some jumps maybe doable that weren't before. Some jumps maybe you'll have to roll them, where before you could rail the outside and jump it. It's going to give a track a different feel. What I'll say too, and I know we had another question which we didn't cover, was how can I be productive in my backyard? And my answer to that would be same answer to this question, is I would go, if you haven't seen it already, go on my YouTube channel and just watch the video on my 4 sets. And my 4 sets are stand up only, sitting down with feet on the pegs, one hand, and then what I call normal. So foot up, high and tight, just like how you normally hit a corner. Go through those 4 sets a couple times. This should be something that you do, absolutely on a weekly basis, at least a couple times a week. For me, it's fun. I love doing the one hand. I think stand up is fun. I even think doing the sitting down with the feet on the pegs adds some different characteristics to it, because you start to get the lean angle, but you have to try to learn to trust your legs being up and not dabbing your foot on the ground. So that makes it interesting too. I would say also having practice, and this might seem silly, but I used to always do it, and it's definitely added to my ability of just all around bike control. I used to always practice whips and like nose wheelies and tire taps and kind of everything along those lines. Even doing like, not to recommend doing tricks, but I would even do tricks. I would do heel clickers and no fred cans and knacks and all types of different stuff when I was on 65s and 85s. I just felt like it gave me more control and more of a feel for my bike, especially wheeling and practicing tire taps and seat bouncing on little types of stuff. That's translated huge to my supercross ability. There's times when I could tire tap certain obstacles that most riders can't, or I can wheelie over something that, you know, other people may not think to wheelie over. It's fun, but it's also, it can be more productive than you would think.
Well, I think there's something to be said to get yourself in a situation where you can control it versus finding yourself in a situation where both feet are off the pegs and you're Supermaning it and you don't know what to do.
Right.
You know, so if you could, I think there's something to be said for that, for sure.
Right. And I would even, again, I don't know if I would tell people to go do this. I would always like goon ride. You know what I mean? So you would end up in these crazy, weird scenarios with a bike straight up and down, and you would just kind of learn how to deal with it. It would be a pretty unorthodox thing to tell somebody to go and do, but at the same time, like it just gave me that bike control, and it's sort of one way to look at. You want to be productive, of course. You want to go and do your motos, have the stopwatch out if you can, work sections, go through your drills. But there's definitely a time and a place for practicing your whips and your scrubs and that type of stuff if you're at that level. There's certain guys that have no business doing a whip. There's certain guys that have no business trying to scrub a jump. But I would assume if your son's on a 65 and making, you know, top 10 at Mini-O's and qualifying for Loretta's, that I'm sure he's a good enough rider to be doing that stuff. Let's see, how far into this are we, Bryce?
Hour and a half.
Oh, okay, not too shabby. What I would suggest, guys, is keep these questions coming. It's very cool to read these emails. Of course, we're not going to be able to answer every single question, but we're going to try to get to as many as we possibly can. There's going to be podcasts where we just answer one of them at the end. Then we'll do podcasts like this where I think these are fun, where we just dedicate the whole podcast to answering questions. But anything you want to add?
No, I think we covered a lot. I'm glad to see such enthusiastic feedback and questions from everybody. So keep them coming in. We love to be flattered. So thank you for all these positive emails that give us some great feedback on our episodes so far. And whether you listen to one of them or you listen to all of them, or you're planning on listening to some in the future, some of our episodes, we thank you very much for the support and all the kind words. So thanks again.
Yes, sir. All right, toodles.
Well, thank you guys for listening again. Hopefully that answered most of your questions, and it wasn't too long-winded of a conversation. But I like doing stuff like that, and I think it definitely gives the fans and the listeners just an opportunity to engage, and maybe for me to answer questions that I wouldn't have thought to even bring up. Sometimes the same things happen when I teach my classes, where I tend to skip over things, and then once I actually read the question and think that maybe it's not as obvious as I had once thought, like the warm-up question, you know, maybe that's something that I wouldn't have necessarily had talked about, because I would have just thought that it was kind of something that
we take it for granted.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But it's a good question. If you sit back and think about it, it's a good question. So without further ado, and this is very unoriginal of us to have saved it until the last minute, but we'll announce the winner for the FXR giveaway. And again, sponsor of this episode is FXR Racing. Amazing company, great group of people. So check them out at fxrracing.com. And the winner is Josh Deggendorf. So Instagram.
Yay, Josh.
Instagram handle is JDEGGZ. So if you guys want to
JDegs,
go give him a little follow. And we'll be sending him out. What do we got from him? We got a set of FXR gear and a good old AJ Catanzaro MotoX Academy t-shirt. So thanks for the awesome question, Josh. Thanks all of you guys for listening and for sending the questions in. Again, keep them coming. So Bryce, what's the email they can send them in?
You guys can send all your questions, whether it's motor related, AJ related. Probably don't have any questions for me.
If you
I'm a
want to
loser,
know how
but
Bear's doing, maybe.
yeah, it could be.
Or
No, but
Chase.
anything general that you might have picked up in previous podcasts. And again, we've said this before, but just to encourage you again, if you are an interesting person or you know an interesting person who might want to be a guest on the show, send us a note on there too, and we'll try to arrange something. But the email is questions.catpodcast@gmail.com.
And keep in mind, guys, with the Supercross season approaching, once the season starts, we're going to start doing a Monday night podcast kind of as a debrief on the weekend, which I think will be pretty awesome. It'll basically take place of the For Dummies article I would write on Racer X, kind of recapping the whole weekend from a rider's point of view and try to give an objective opinion on the race, but honestly, it's probably the most accurate objective opinion you could get just being in it. I was actually out on the track with everybody. So tune in for those. And then what we're also going to do, I think, Bryce, unless I'm wrong, we're probably going to do another podcast a couple days later.
That's the goal.
Each week. That'll be the goal. Hopefully we can be consistent with it. That'll be a little bit more not motocross related. So
yeah, I'm really excited about the race recap stuff. And for anybody listening who's been a fan of AJ for a while and is a fan of Supercross, motocross, and follows it, you're going to really like it. I think we're going to try to get some interesting characters on that may or may not be relevant in the sport today as guests. So it's going to be fun. I think AJ's take on it, I'm excited about it because this is a conversation that you and I have after pretty much every race on Monday anyway. And now to bring everybody else in the fold and kind of invite them into our conversation, I think there's going to be a lot that people will enjoy. So stay tuned for that. We're less than a month away. It's going to be a fun season. I'm excited. And the show's going to be
riding, huh?
Oh my God, I don't even want to talk about it.
Yeah.
You're sicking me.
Let's not talk about it. But thank you again to FXR. So guys, check out fxrracing.com. And we'll catch you next time.
And thank you, Josh. We'll get in touch with you on the side and let you know all the details about how we're going to get you that stuff. And we just appreciate all the support. So thanks again, everybody.
Toodles.